Lindsay Ellis is one of the biggest and probably one of the most influential video essayists, at the very least left-leaning video essayists that have been present on YouTube for the past, I don't know how many years. And this is her channel here, Lindsay Ellis. And unfortunately, they recently declared that they were going to move away from YouTube and a lot of the online persona and online platform that she'd been building. And in doing so, she also put out a letter to the people who were curious about why she was leaving. And in this video, we're going to read that letter and go through it. And then I'm going to give some of my thoughts on the entire situation, the things that she points out, and yeah, all the rest of it basically. So she published this on her Patreon, which I have access to here. Per my knowledge, originally it was unlocked so anyone could read it. Since then, it's moved that you can only see it if you're a Patreon. So to do this, I signed up to a Patreon, and now I can view it directly from the from the Patreon page here. To the best of my knowledge, I don't think Lindsay has any issues with it being read publicly like this. Although if that ends up being the case, then I'll take down the video or the VOD or whatever. May be necessary. But to the best of my knowledge, this is probably fine. And let's begin reading. Walking away from Omelas. I hope that's how I pronounce it. I'm not quite sure what this means actually, but that's a great start. My bad. Walking away from Omelas. This was going to be a YouTube video, but I just don't have it in me to invite that kind of scrutiny. To be the last in the sick, sad line of YouTubers who get all weepy on camera and cry about how they just can't do this anymore. Boo hoo hoo. I had planned to move video content to Nebula, but I realize now that doing that is just keeping the wounds wide open. My life ended 9 months ago. What has been taking up bandwidth ever since then has been a ghost. It's almost funny how many people will insist that I have lost nothing, because subscriber count is the only metric for success and cancel culture doesn't exist. One YouTube channel chugging along on algorithmic inertia is not success. It's just an engine driving on fumes. Many will say this is being melodramatic, that my life isn't over, that there was absolutely nothing stopping me from brushing myself off, building back up goodwill, and shutting up and playing the game. And I try that. In a way, I suppose it's good that I did, because I needed to learn the hard way that was never going to work. There is no unfucking this. You can't find the energy if there's nothing left to convert to it. You can't be a better person if you're nothing but the hollow shell of one. 2021 has been the worst year of my life. I am traumatized by it. To this day, I still have people scolding me by how I handled it, that I should have handled it differently, that I should have controlled my stance, as if I had the capability to know that any of these people were even saying to strangers on Twitter while I was shitting blood for weeks on end. The worst thing about this whole year is that I can't even admit this trauma because of all the rhetorical devices people have already come up with to dismiss it. That centering my own pain is evidence of me not listening. Does it occur to these people that you can listen and disagree with other people's conclusions? That I'm weaponizing my fragile white womanhood or whatever to point out that having thousands upon thousands of people who you have never met hate you and say whatever will get them the most updates about is in fact traumatizing. That people I used to know would fragrantly lie about me on Twitter.com to the tune of thousands of retweets and tens of thousands of likes, and I just had to sit there and take it. My favorites are the people who dismiss any potential harm I might have incurred as justified because I am a wealthy white woman. I am not wealthy. While these people's hearts positively bleed for Britney Spears. These people don't see how similar these talking points are to the same boomer bootstrap parenting style that I thought most of us agreed was abusive. That you need to toughen up, accept your punishment, accept that even if the reaction was outside that you did something wrong. Because where there's smoke, there's fire. Grow a thicker skin. These same people who always cry about believing victims, telling victims of public dog pals that they do not deserve to claim their trauma, let alone to process it because they deserved it. There's no such thing as cancel culture. There is no incentive/reward structure in places like Twitter to call people out. There are no updudes/favs/followers/retweets for hodding a take on whomever is trending. I reread the 2015 essay, hot allostatic load for the first time in years last night, and I could not stop crying. Even reading some of these passages now, I can't stop crying. This was written from the perspective of a trans femme and discusses some rhetorical devices used to demonize trans women specifically, which obviously does not apply to me, but some of it is spot on. One of the most common tools of exclusion is through mobbing, which is rarely talked about because unlike rape, murder, etc., it's not easy to pin it on a single person or scapegoat. Mobbing is emotional abuse practiced by a group of people, usually peers, over a long period of time through methods such as gaslighting, rumor mongering, and ostracism. It's most documented in workplace or academic environments, i.e. key points of capitalist tension, but is thoroughly institutionalized into feminist, queer, and radical spaces as well. Here is why it is horrible. Number 1. It has an unusually strong power to damage the victim's relationship to society, because it can't be written off as an outlier, as some singular monster. It reveals a fundamental truth about people that makes it difficult to trust ever again. People become like aliens, like a pack of animals that can turn on you as soon as some mysterious pheromone shift marks you for death. Number 2. The insidious nature of emotional abuse. How do you fight ostracism and rumors? They leave no bruises, they just starve you. Number 3. Mobbing typically occurs in a place where victim is trapped by some need or obligation. Work, school, circles of friends. This can prolong exposure to damaging extremes. For these reasons, PTSD is almost an inevitable outcome of any protracted mobbing case. The Isabel Fall case is almost a textbook example about how online mobbing harms people, and how the people who participate in these mobs never engage in any self-reflection. When some people read Fall's helicopter story and question the trans bona fides of the author in the early 2020, Twitter did what Twitter does and ruined Fall's life. Death by a million cuts. No one single person even beginning to question whether they did anything wrong by jumping to the worst possible faith interpretation of both the text and the author. After a profile written by Emily van der Werf, apologies if I mispronounced that, was published in late 2021, where lessons learned about the way we use internet mobs to tear people down, tear down people we don't know because of situations we don't understand. No, one of Fall's detractors, Neon Yang, became the new scapegoat du jour, using some of the exact same tactics used the prior year to attack Fall. I'm not going to touch on Yang's original comments about Fall, or the pushback to them, but what was downright charming in its lack of self-awareness about that whole situation was the way people used Fall's trauma to hurt Yang, the way they invoked Fall being checked into the hospital while Yang said whatever about Fall and helicopter story, all while having absolutely no idea what was going on in Yang's private life. What's particularly galling is how many people accuse Yang of sending a trans person to the hospital with PTSD, while apparently being completely oblivious to the fact that they could very well be doing the same thing to Yang, a non-binary trans person. There was no lesson learned on the nature of mindless dogpiling, just Twitter doing what Twitter does, failing to examine systems of abuse while continuing to perpetuate them by laying onto a new scapegoat. Again, a quote from Hot Allostatic Load. Feminist/queer spaces are more willing to criticize people than abusive systems because they want to reserve the right to use those systems for their own purposes. At least attacking people can be politically viable, especially in a token system where you benefit directly by their absence, or where your status as a good feminist is dependent on constantly rooting out evil. When the bounty system calls for the ears of evil people, well, most people have a fucking ear. Something else that was also inevitable. I was going to quit YouTube. I knew I couldn't do it forever, that I was running out of steam, that I was sick of the increasing dehumanization inherent, that I just didn't have anything to say about movies anymore. The plan was always to end with Love Never Dies, since it seemed like the best place to end, with some semblance of energy rather than keeping on until I've withered away to nothing. What happened to me in March and April hastened it, but this was always inevitable. My initial plan was to leave YouTube for Nebula, but I realize now that it is only entrenching myself in a more intimate form of harm rather than the broad, buckshot kind that YouTube invites. I won't go into detail, not right now anyway, but I can't do video content for them either. I can't make content, period. I just can't do this anymore. There is no healing as long as there is attachment to the thing that makes you suffer, and the thing in this case is being in the public eye at all. What I wanted was to quietly disappear, But since this is a platform where people are paying me to make content, I feel like I have to make a statement. If it were just me, by myself, I would just sign off and say goodbye and that would be it. But I have a team who depends on my company for health insurance, and including dependents, I supply full benefits for 8 people. And here in the US, employer-based insurance is often the only feasible option. Saying to everyone, sorry about your children, but they can't have insurance anymore because Twitter makes me sad, just doesn't seem like a fair deal. None of them incidentally know that I am posting this. So the only thing I can do for right now is to keep this page active with loose promises that someday I'll figure out something in the future to make up for this, while asking you please stop messaging me apologizing for not being able to subscribe anymore. You don't owe me anything. This Patreon is like my own life and career, just running on fumes. But all I know is that being in the public eye at all is a losing game, but I regret all of it. And I regret all of it. I regret every time I've ever stood up for anyone. It always backfires. I regret every time I pushed back against something unjust. It was always just used to hurt me. I regret every time I ever stood up for myself. I never did it correctly. I regret every time I showed any vulnerability. Just more ammunition to be used against me later. I regret every time I ever tried to play the game with peers and colleagues. They will drop you the second you aren't popular on Twitter anymore. It's all hollow and brittle. And if there is one thing I have learned this year, it's how eminently expendable I am. The good, progressive, cis, straight, wealthy white men keep on trucking and come out on top because deep down, they know that the systems they profess to stand against ultimately exist to benefit them. And to all the people telling me I need to grow a thicker skin or remove myself from the conversation altogether, you are right. I don't have it in me to do the former, so I shall do the latter. Hope your New Year's is better than this. So obviously we have this statement that that Lindsay made. The incident that she's referencing when she's talking about 9 months ago, I believe, is another thing that happened because of Twitter that she covers extensively in this very good video called Mask Off, taking accountability with a few emojis here, where they talk about what happened, because this whole thing 9 months ago, it started with a tweet that Lindsay Ellis made. And if I recall correctly, Lindsay Ellis was making a comparison between a new Disney show that was a Disney movie and the similarities it had to Avatar: The Last Airbender. And she was commenting how there's a lot of similarities, there's a lot of interplay, and a lot of these type of movies have played a lot and derived a lot of what made Avatar: The Last Airbender so good. Which, it's a connection, you know, that somebody that's a movie critic should be able to make. But the way that this was ran with was how Lindsay Ellis is a person who thinks all Asian media and all Asian stories and, you know, mythology and all of it is just all the same. It's all the Avatar: The Last Airbender. So anything that is Asian in nature when it comes to its production or anything automatically falls within that category. And that's demonstrative of her anti-Asian bias or not being, you know, culturally in touch enough or whatever. And that was the main thing that started it 9 months ago. And because of that, a lot of other stuff was also dug up about her past and other tweets and other videos and even some very personal things, which I will not go into here. I would just recommend that, hey, for more information, please do watch Mask Off by Lindsay Ellis. It does give a lot more context on the situation and what was going on, including having some very poignant parts of the video like this. But yeah, there's also this also it's also good to mention another video that has a similar key topic in mind, which is canceling by ContraPoints. Covers some very similar incidents. I know that ContraPoints has expressed similar emotions that Lindsay has been expressing here, and I hope that that they are also doing well, or also that they're doing well, ContraPoints. So yeah, the video by ContraPoints called Canceling or Cancellation, I think it's called Canceling, is also a very good video for further information on what this type of thing and how it is to be in the in the passenger seat of a Twitter hate mob, so to say. But yeah, I have a few things just to say about this, and these are just general critiques that I can give as a whole towards Twitter Spaces, and also a lot of elements of progressive left-leaning spaces. So to someone who may be less politically inclined, somebody who hears that, oh, a big left-leaning, progressive content creator was driven off the internet because of hate mobs, most people are going to imagine that, hey, it's probably going to be a bunch of right-wingers and conservative and Nazis bombarding them with like hate and all forms of bigotry and driving them off the internet. But that's not the case. That's actually what I assumed when I talked to my parents a bit about what I was going to be talking about today. I told them about that, and when I said that it was actually other left-leaning people that were responsible for, the hate waves and stuff like that, they were very surprised, which I don't blame them. But yeah, it is often progressives, and it is often very, Puritan left-leaning people that tend to engage in this type of behavior. And the main thing really that I really hope that we understand where this sort of stems in and what the main thing that goes wrong is. And Lindsay talks about this a lot in her Mask Off video, and refers to it in her big, text post, which is the fact that people are always so incredibly uncharitable towards other people in internet online spaces. People are always given the worst possible interpretation of what you're saying. Now, why people might go to this interpretation is a different question, but we know for sure that this is done. Because, let's be honest, okay? If you look at most of the tweets and most of the things that a lot of left-wing people have been canceled for over the past, few years really, and you just try to, put yourself in their position and just be even like a smidgen charitable towards anything that they're saying, or not even that, just don't be like ridiculously, ludicrously uncharitable. It makes sense. At worst, it might be a misunderstanding. At best, it might be something that's, slightly poorly worded. In other cases, it's just a message that's completely innocuous, but there is like a little crack where somebody can, bludgeon in a sword of bad faith or whatever, and open that up and, open them up to a bunch of criticism and stuff like that. People are not given space to grow. When it comes to people like ContraPoints or Lindsay Ellis, and when they make something, they make a tweet or they make like a stylistic choice in their video decision, maybe going straight to, oh, this is demonstrative of a grifting, deeply held, bigoted attitude that they've been hiding from their audience for years, that they're slowly dog whistling right now. Maybe a more reasonable explanation is just that, okay, maybe they weren't aware of how there might be an issue with this. Maybe they didn't consider that it might be read in this way. Something like that. It makes a lot more sense, is a lot more charitable. Remember, often, the principle of Occam's razor, right? Never assume, maliciousness, and the principle, and always assume other forms of, explanations. Sometimes stupidity, but also oftentimes things like maybe misunderstandings, or not really, grasping the full depth of a situation, or not considering the way that a particular thing might be read. Now, that's just in some cases. In a lot of cases, it's honestly just people taking it completely just out of nowhere, just completely manufacturing something to be outraged about. And that's absolutely the case in a lot of cases, but, in others, it's legitimately just something small that, warranted maybe like a, hey, by the way, you should be aware of this, not a big text post about how, Lindsay Ellis is secretly a deeply bigoted person that's dog whistling this to the rising conservative audience or something. I don't know. But yeah, so charitability and reading into somebody's intent is extraordinarily important. It's different, if somebody that's progressive or left-leaning or that you generally know a bit about says something, whereas somebody who is deeply and genuinely bigoted says something. In the case where you know about their person and you know that, hey, they're most likely not bigoted or whatever, then, drawing that conclusion is very unreasonable. So try to put yourself in their shoes, try to look at intent, and try not to, misrepresent or mischaracterize what people are saying, and just have the slightest bit of charitability, because it will give you a lot more of an accurate conclusion as for what they're actually saying and what they're trying to convey and where they're at, and it will guide you towards a more appropriate response towards commenting on a piece of media. Instead of condemning them wholly for being a bigot or whatever, maybe just be like, hey, there was like something in here, it's not like a huge thing, but maybe you should be aware of this, and maybe if you had been aware of it, you'd made a different, artistic decision with this given piece, or maybe you would have worded things differently or whatever. But Yeah. And this also goes for a lot of past material, how really the important thing is about how someone is now and what they're doing right now. If you have a person that has, engaged in a lot of really good, progressive, anti-bigoted, activism and, production and art for a series of years, and then something very, very minor happens, such as that last Airbender tweet, and then people just dogpile them with a bunch of things for the past. Some of them that the person in question actually recognizes wasn't good, and they apologize for them, and they have in the past, or they didn't want it to be brought up for whatever reason. That's also a very strong sign of the fact that that you're just trying to do everything you can to pile on the hate mob instead of trying to understand this person's situation and actually reaching a more a more productive conclusion to this. The left is eating itself in large part because of Twitter. The biggest threat, the things that most people are scared of right now, especially at a bigger size, I don't think people are as scared about 4chan troll groups or whatever anymore. It's legitimately the Twitter mobs. It's the other left-leaning people who try to do it in order to sort of pump themselves up. And while we're on the topic of empathy and stuff like that, and you bring up a good point here, Malik, before I go to that. Some of it has to do with Twitter's incentive structure, the way that Twitter is structured, the fact that it lends itself towards uncharitable reading, towards hitting zingers and getting a super, popular, low nuance, statement to go very viral or whatever. So yeah, there's quite a bit to say about Twitter there in its structure as well. But while we're on the topic of empathy and not being very silly in the interpretations that you have of a person, given what you know about them and what is more likely, the fact that there is some good faith misunderstanding rather than bigotry or whatever. I'm also going to empathize a bit with the Twitter mobs and why they might be doing it. Now, just for clarification, empathizing with somebody doesn't mean that what they're doing is right. It means you understand where they're coming from. And understanding where other people are coming from in society and how they're thinking about things and what might drive them to do something is a very, very basic step that is needed to understand others as human beings and to solve large popular and social issues, such as the things that we're talking about here. So I do think that there may be, a lot of people that may genuinely care about a lot of the, the social messages or the social values that they proclaim to have. There are some people who just do it because they just want the clout from getting the zingers. I'm sure they exist, and for them, there's not really much to say. It's just that they need to come to terms with the fact internally that they are actively ruining people's lives, people's careers, the progressive movements or whatever social movements that they stand for, and may indirectly be contributing to social harm against that person, but also against others. But for the people that genuinely care about, social values, but may nevertheless jump in on this bandwagon, I think one of the main reasons why this might be is because we live in a world in which I think a lot of people are becoming increasingly politicized. A lot of politics is seeping into the mainstream, especially among the younger people who are disproportionately going to be on the internet. And also because of the internet and the media spheres and all the information we have access to, a lot of people are going to feel that, wow, there is so much fucked up stuff going on right now in society. There's so many issues. There's all these deep institutional things going on. There's all this racism here. There's all this bigotry there. There is, poverty and wealth gaps and climate change and everything like that. And a lot of people feel really powerless. And that really hurts, because if you really care about something and you really have an interest in trying to, ameliorate or make something better in the world, and you have these strong values about what you think is good and what you think is bad and all these negative things happening around the world, but a lot of people don't have an outlet. They don't really have anything that they can do about it. It's very hard. There are some things that a lot of people have access to. So people that may have good, local communities that may engage in some action towards some social political causes, they might have something to do. But for a lot of young people especially, all they really have is the internet and is social media. And that's where their political advocacy and them expressing the values that they have begins and ends. And, hey, there isn't much you can do towards, demolishing the patriarchy or systemic racism or, phobia against gender and sexual minorities from Twitter. It's pretty difficult. There are some ways in which it can contribute 100%, but largely it's very, very difficult. So when opportunities like what happened to Lindsay Ellis or even ContraPoints pops up, where you're given the opportunity to distinguish yourself from somebody who's doing a perceived wrong, to, in your mind, clear the space from people who may have problematic attitudes or whatever. A lot of people jump on that because they just genuinely are so powerless in society. There isn't much that they can do. And when something like this pops up, no matter how flimsy the initial piece of evidence might be, it's something. It's some exertion of power that people can delude themselves into thinking is actually supporting any progressive or left-leaning cause. So they jump onto that and they sit on that and they contribute to a lot of the targeted harassment that leads to stuff like what happened with Lindsay Ellis. And that's what I think, and this is something that a lot of other people talk about as well. I think it's a point that Lindsay Ellis mentions in her video, this exact thing as well. This is probably one of the key drivers behind why a lot of people might engage in the Twitter hate mob. Now, a lot of it is probably just people who just like to see numbers go up and they could be saying anything. A lot of people, it's just like a group mob mentality thing and they just get swept up into it, but they don't really have any feelings or cares about anything like that. That's probably like a whole, big range of people. And for those people, the main thing there is probably just self-reflection and introspection that needs to be done there. Maybe some form of intervention or something. But to the people I've described here, to the people that, think and that believe that they do have these core values, that they do care about, and that they are upset at the world around them and what's happening, that sense of powerlessness can lead into you channeling all of that energy into these targeted harassment campaigns to purge people for their perceived wrongs in a social space. Now, that's the understanding, that's the empathizing, but the conclusion to that still is that's not a healthy way to do it. It's not a productive way to do it. It's a fucking disgusting and terrible way to do it. You are accomplishing nothing. Nothing positive at the very least. What you are accomplishing is contributing to an incredibly hateful environment, spaces in which people are unable to grow in their beliefs and as people, a space in which people are increasingly subject to online targeted harassment campaigns that become very, very difficult to avoid, especially if their career is tied up into internet stuff. And you're contributing to people like Lindsay Ellis quitting their internet careers and doing other stuff that, by all means, is much, much, much healthier for them. Internet careers tend to be quite toxic, but you're still nevertheless contributing to a reduction in people that you have that are influential and that do speak for the things that you proclaim to care about. It's not the right thing to do. It's not the right way to channel your, sense of powerlessness into just going off on these people for their perceived wrongs. It's not a healthy thing to do. Try to engage in some other form of advocacy. Even if you do, and even if the only thing you can do, if there's nothing you can do interpersonally, and really everything you can do is just confined towards Twitter. I know it's not as sexy to do this. I know it's not as interesting to do this, but hey, if you see a content creator that you know about or that you like or has similar values, before you go off and you, in a very aggressive way and in a very condescending way, point out the 99 different microaggressions in the recent video review of a Disney movie, maybe put yourself in their shoes for a minute. Do you think that person intended to do those things, to say those things, to maybe, in some way imply the thing that you're identifying there? Or do you think it's probably maybe just a misunderstanding? Do you think that they might not be aware of that? Or maybe, and this is a crazy thought, maybe they're aware of something that you're not. Maybe they had a reason for doing that you weren't aware of. Maybe your understanding of a given topic isn't quite complete. And if you want to reach out and you want to make that clear, you can feel free to do that. just reach out to them, make a tweet or whatever, where you can be like, in a very polite way, be like, hey, I just watched this video, and I'm a bit unsure about like one part of the video. I'm not quite sure what the implication with this is, or maybe you weren't aware of this, but putting things in this way could come off as a bit rude. So I just wanted to make you aware of that, and yeah, keep having a nice day. Just something like that. Maybe reaching out to them privately as well through like an email or maybe like a DM, depending on the size of the content creator, is a lot more of a healthy way to do that. Now, once again, it's not a sexy thing to do. The sexy thing to do is to get a fucking zinger ratio quote tweet on that person. That's the cool thing to do, but it's not the right thing to do. It's not the kind thing to do. It's not the empathetic thing to do. So yeah, try not to do that. And yeah, the space isn't conductive to it. The website isn't conductive to it. Nothing is conductive to it, but I still think that it's a good thing to mention in case some people think about things a bit differently now. And somebody in chat pointed out, yeah, this is legitimately, this isn't anything crazy. This is basic, like, empathy stuff. This is basic, like, seeing things from the other people's perspective. This is basic degrees of charitability and basic degrees of good faith that unfortunately we have to go over. And just because I might be able to lay it out in like a structured way where I can explain where people might be coming from and all the 99 different ways by which engaging in this type of, rhetoric or this type of behavior, these hate mobs, isn't productive, I'm not saying that it's an easy thing for people, to just step out of that, because there is so much playing against that. There is the feeling of helplessness. There is the algorithmic boost. There are the dopamine centers that go off in your brain when you get all the retweets and all the likes. But hopefully, being more aware of the other side of things, being more aware about the negative feelings and the emotions and the consequences that you have on the people that you're harassing, being aware of the macro outcomes that you have of this type of behavior and these bandwagon effect, having a chilling effect on the ability for people to, express their opinions, do art, and engaging things in a way that, they believe is healthy and that is, often actively, anti-bigotry or whatever. And hopefully when you weigh that in, it might balance it out a little bit and help out. So yeah, I empathize with the people who do these Twitter hate mobs. If we were doing a reciprocative thing, they are not deserving of the empathy and the sympathy given the way that they often treat other people. But regardless, this is still something that needs to be done, and that's what we're trying to do here. But yeah, that still shouldn't detract from the fact that the major person that is being hurt here and the real person that deserves our empathy and our sympathy in this moment is Lindsay Ellis and people like her have been subject to similar behavior. Like, for example, ContraPoints. And hopefully this doesn't lead to more people doing these type of things. I know ContraPoints has mentioned that she's thought about quitting on multiple occasions, and I don't think I need to tell you what a great loss that would be for so many people and for so many causes. But I sincerely hope that we don't have more people who jump off and are forced to leave because of stuff like this. And to those people, this is not like you guys better not leave. This is like I hope we can stop the causes that force you to leave and take time off and, do what Lindsay Ellis has had to do. If you feel like it's the thing that's best for you, I don't blame you at all. And nobody should have to remain in a space where you feel the way that Lindsay Ellis does or that other people may feel. Do what's healthiest for you. It's not your fault. If everything, it gets a bit too much sometimes. But regardless, hopefully we are able to put a stop to this and this type of behavior before we see that happening and see that taking place more. So in the end, once again, best of luck to Lindsay Ellis. I'm really sorry that this happened and you had to go through this and you're still currently dealing with the effects from that. I feel the same way about other people who have been victim to the same thing. I hope I have in a decent way explained why this type of behavior is bad and what the solution to it is, and also maybe done a bit of, empathizing with the people who may participate in it, but very much still, explain why it's not a healthy way to deal with the type of pressures that they have going on, and now it's hurting the cause. And yeah, once again, watch Lindsay Ellis's video called Mask Off, ContraPoint's video on canceling for more information about this exact thing, and yeah, best of luck to Lindsay Ellis. Thank you.